Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for joining me for part 2 of this virtual improvisation clinic for your song You Dig, sponsored by the Southwest Iowa Bandmasters Association. Again, my name is Sean Bell. I am a professional trombonist and jazz educator based out of Omaha, Nebraska. Today, we're going to extend some of the concepts that we talked about at the end of part 1. You'll remember in that video, we talked a little bit about the blues scale, how we practice it and apply it, and then we spent some time laying the foundation for our arpeggios and understanding how to build arpeggios. Today, we're going to talk about how to actually move that arpeggio information into something that sounds a little bit more musical. Admittedly, those are very exercise-based when we first start practicing them. However, they're actually the key to us sounding like authentic improvisers. Okay, let's dig into some of the ways where we can make these arpeggios feel a little bit more musical. The first thing that we can do is that we can vary the rhythm. When we played these in the last lesson, we really just played them as quarter notes. We were really just trying to understand the base level music theory. However, we can start to add some rhythm to them and make them sound a little bit more interesting. The first thing I would try, and this is the first way I actually usually have my students practice these, is by just shifting those quarter notes to eighth notes and having a tied over long note at the end. It would sound something like this. We're going to play our F7 arpeggio. Now already that sounds like a more jazz appropriate idea. Now just like in the first lesson, make sure that you check out the handout that accompanies this so you can get all these examples in all your different transpositions. Clearly I am a trombone player, so I'm going to be playing them on trombone. However, for alto saxophone players, trumpet players, you want to make sure you have those correct transpositions in front of you. During the lesson, I'm going to talk in concert pitch, and the exercises that I display on the screen are going to be in treble clef. So really make sure you get that material so you can follow along the best way possible. Okay, let's put that rhythm into the first 4 measures of our blues form. We're going to play these eighth notes with a tied over end of 2 on that flat 7 for each measure. In the 4th measure, I had to accommodate that I have 2 chords in that bar, similar to the way I did in the last lesson. And this time I just chose to play 4 eighth notes because that was going to fit better with the rhythm that I already had. All right, once we have a handle on playing these arpeggios a little faster and more of a swing rhythm, we can vary the rhythm, vary the direction, maybe we even vary how many chord tones we include. Lots of things we can do here to make these sound more musical. So let's just think about a few examples. First, I'm going to start by just varying the rhythm, but I'm still always going to start on the root and I'm going to play up through the chord. Let's see what that would sound like. So at the end of that phrase, you could hear I actually anticipated the B flat. That's the next chord that's coming, and I want to end on that on the end of 4 in this case. All right, that was just varying the rhythm. What if I varied my rhythm, but also started to change the direction I went through the chord? We talked in the last lesson about making sure you practice arpeggios up and down. What if I combine those 2 things together? Now hopefully you could hear that rhythm was almost exactly the same as the first example I played. I just changed directions throughout the entire thing to give the line sort of a different flavor. Now our final bit of variation that we might want to add is thinking about I don't always have to start on the same chord member. And the last 2 examples I started either on the root or on the flat 7, so either the bottom of the chord or the top of the chord. What if I added in my inversions and started on any member of the chord that I wanted to? To show this, I'm actually going to play through an entire chorus of the blues with the play along, kind of throwing all of these different ways to vary arpeggios into a pile and see what comes out. Now, I actually chose to write out a chorus here so that you could really hear all these examples. If I was actually improvising, I don't know if I would consciously think about, hey, I'm going to vary this measure this way and this measure this way. It comes from practicing them in sort of a confined space like we're doing right now, and then eventually it just becomes second nature. So let's check this out with the play along, all of our different arpeggio variations. Okay, cool. So hopefully that helps you hear how just using our arpeggios, changing rhythm, changing direction, changing starting notes, we can actually start to play some stuff that really feels like jazz and feels like a confident, authentic, improvised solo. The next step after that, if we really want to get in touch with how the masters really treated this material, is learning how to ornament our arpeggios. As with all things improvisation related, listening is the key way to get this. If you really want to learn how Charlie Parker used ornamentation with arpeggios, and he did a lot of his language is based on arpeggios and how he sort of made them more elaborate, you need to go listen to him. Yes, you could read it out of a book, but listening is absolutely the key. Now, while we're working on developing that knowledge of the recorded tradition of jazz, we can do some exercises that will help us get in touch with some of those same sort of ideas. Today, we're going to talk about 2 ways to ornament these arpeggios. Number 1 is approach notes. So when we play an approach note, we are thinking of, I have a target note that is inside the chord, and I'm going to approach that from either above or below by a half step or a whole step. Let's look at our first chord in the blues to kind of see how this works out. That is an F7 chord in concert pitch. My target note is going to be the F, the root. I'm going to approach that by a half step. That might seem like a really small change, and it is when it's just one chord and one note. But once we put this into context, you're going to see how this can really add some interest into your lines. So let's check this out through the first 4 measures of the blues. We're going to add a approach note from below by a half step, going to each root of the chord. Now, you'll notice that some of those approach notes are not inside the chord that we are going to. In the 4th measure, we have a C minor chord, or whatever would be in your various transpositions, but we have a C, an E flat, a G, and a B flat. However, on the end of 2, when we're doing this approach note exercise, we end up with an E natural on that chord. We might think, Sean, playing a major third on a minor chord, that's a pretty big no-no in jazz. Well, in this case, it's going to create a momentary bit of tension, and then that's going to release when we resolve on that F. And that actually feels good. That gives our lines forward momentum when we have that tension release, and that actually creates a pretty slick line for that measure. That particular measure is a 2-5 going to B flat. So C is the 2 chord of B flat, F is the 5, and then B flat is the 1. Moving through these 2 5s in smooth and sort of interesting ways is a big part of what we want to work on to become good improvisers. And just using arpeggios with approach notes really gets us there in this context. Now, that was approaching each root by a half step. What if we started on an inverted chord and approached each third by a half step? Now here you're really going to start to see some non-harmonic tones. If you check out your handout, you'll see leading to that F7 chord in the first measure, we have a G sharp, or leading to the B flat chord, we have a C sharp. So those are notes that are firmly outside of the key we're in an F, but that's actually going to sound nice. It's going to introduce some interesting chromaticism into our playing that's going to make us sound maybe a little more hip than we might even be. Let's hear what this will sound like. Again, I especially like the 4th measure here on the 2-5 to B flat. That's a pretty happening little line. That's something that would be very at home in a sort of bebop tune. And that's, I think, what most of us are trying to connect with. How do we get this sort of bebop sensibility into our playing? I mentioned there were 2 different types of ornamentation that we were going to deal with today. The other one is very similar. It is called an enclosure. So rather than just approaching a note by one step, we're going to enclose a target tone. We're going to be above, below, and then resolve to our target note. So for example, if our target note was an F, we might play this. Now we apply these in the exact same way, where we think about what is our target note, and we enclose each target note. So again, let's look at what this would look like in the first 4 measures of our blues. What you'll find as you work on these enclosures is that there's a lot of variation you could do here. Different players play them differently. There's a couple different ways you can slice these enclosures. Sometimes it's half steps above, sometimes it's whole steps above. I wouldn't get too bogged down on the specifics of it. As you work on these, you will learn to gravitate towards what your ear likes the most. And especially as you start to really dig into listening to the greats, you will hear that, oh, so-and-so played it like this, but so-and-so over here, they played it a little differently. And that's okay. There are lots of different ways to vary this sort of information. Okay, let's check this out a little more in context. I'm going to use the play along here that is provided with your song, and I'm going to play one chorus of blues, again, written out here so that you can see how some of this stuff connects, but I'm going to really lean on using enclosures and approach notes to ornament my arpeggios. I'm only going to play arpeggios in this. Now, you're going to hear a lot of things that sound non-arpeggio based because there are these approach notes and enclosures in there. Now, I've labeled all the approach notes in red and all the enclosures in blue so you can see where these are taking place and kind of connect with how that sounds. So here we go, let's check it out. All right, the final thing that we're going to cover today is how we take these arpeggios and start to combine them with some of the other improvisational stuff that we know. In the first lesson, we started out by talking about the blues scale, and that's what we're going to lean on here. We're going to combine some of our arpeggio information with some of our blues information, and that's really going to lead us to sounding pretty authentic as improvisers. Just like in the first lesson where we set a predetermined way we were going to practice through the blues, we're going to do the same thing here. Instead of choosing a predetermined lick though, we're going to choose a predetermined concept to play in each chunk of the blues. So check out your handout, I've got this all spelled out. You'll see in the first two measures, I have a bracket that says arpeggios. So we're going to play arpeggios for the first two measures of the blues. And then the second two measures, or the third and fourth measure, we are going to play a blues idea. Same thing for the next phrase. First two measures, arpeggios. Next two measures, blues idea. Same thing for the last phrase. And you'll hear by doing this, and especially by including some of these ways of varying arpeggios, varying the blues ideas you can play, you'll really sound like a pretty authentic improviser pretty quickly. So let's check out what this would sound like. I'm going to play two choruses here. One where I'm very, very strict with my arpeggios. I'm just going to play them up, starting on the root like we started out this lesson, and then combine that with some blues stuff. The second chorus, I'm going to freely vary how I use the arpeggio information, whether I go up or down, change rhythms, use enclosures. And you're going to hear in that second chorus, well, this just sounds like a confident improvised solo where we all want to get to. So let's check this out. All right, that wraps us up for this two-part online improvisation clinic for the Southwest Iowa Bandmasters Association. If you enjoy any of this stuff, I encourage you to check out my YouTube channel as well. There's lots of information there similar to this, lots of online lessons that if you're interested in continuing to improve your jazz playing, that's a great resource, not just for trombone players, but for all instrumentalists. All right, we'll see all of you in the woodshed.